People that work in the wedding industry, have you ever seen a couple and immediately thought, this ends in divorce? Why? Story 1. Not sure if this belongs here, since I'm really sure that they got divorced after, but anyway, I was helping out at my parents' restaurant where a huge wedding party was hosted. I was busy serving drinks and suddenly loud yelling and screaming started right behind me. Turns out the bride had somehow found out that the groom had hooked up with her sister right before the wedding ceremony, and apparently on a few occasions before, and in her anger she stabbed him in the chest with a dinner fork several times. We had to call an ambulance and the police. It was like edit. I didn't expect this story to blow up that much, but since a bunch of people asked, I just called my mom and asked about this story, and apparently the former bride's parents are still regular guests at my parents' restaurant, not for weddings though. And according to my mother, they told that the groom and the bride's sister now actually have 2 children together and are planning on getting married, but had to cancel their wedding multiple times due COVID-19 edit 2. Since a bunch of people asked, no, I don't know what happened to the bride or how she and her family get along now, and neither does my mom. I don't think she went to jail for this though. She probably got sentenced to a fine or probation. This story takes place in Germany. She probably got sentenced in accordance with Section 224 IS2 STGB, aka dangerous bodily harm. Story 2. Photographing the groom, and you see his eyes light up when a guest arrives. You look over and it's a cute woman in a short dress. He smiles, walks up to the woman, picks her up and swings her in his arms. Best smile I captured of the groom all day. Marriage didn't last 6 months from what I've heard. Story 3. I work in a hotel. I came in one night to find the wedding was already wrapped up. It was supposed to go until 1 a.m., and it was 11 p.m. because the wedding couple had a fight and she went home with mom. At another one, they had a huge rehearsal dinner fight which spilled out into the lobby. Everyone in the lobby found out that she hated his parents. She was pregnant and she had no idea who the father was, and a few other things. Half the guest list packed up and checked out the next day. They still got married. Story 4. All the fucking time. You know how they say 50% of weddings end in divorce? I can pretty much predetermine who that 50% are going to be with about 98% accuracy. I bake wedding cakes for a living. I own my own bakery, but I've also worked in a country club kitchen, doing basically the same thing plus other pastry chef duties day of weddings. I've seen them both for the tasting design consultation and on their wedding day. I see how they interact when they're just together, but also when under stress of the big day. I've seen everything. Lots of cheating, lots of drunks, lots of terrible mothers. Once had a mama's boy who ignored his wife when they were supposed to be having their cake tasting to cuddle their mother and hand feed her cake. His mother was not supposed to be there, and you could tell the bride was pissed. By the end of it, he had kissed his mother on the lips multiple times. Divorce. Have seen a woman and complain at everything her fiancé said. Any suggestions he had for what he liked resulted in him being called stupid. Anytime she'd open her mouth, he'd cower and flinch. Their cake actually got canceled like a month before the wedding, so we didn't get anything but the deposit even though we'd started baking it. First time I've lost out on money and I've been relieved. Once had this arrogant dickhead Turkish guy marrying into this Bangladeshi family. Bride was sweet, about 10 years older than him, and came from a fairly well-off family. Generally got the impression that this being a Turk-South Asian marriage was kind of a big deal, even though they're both Muslim. But since she was 30-something, they wanted her to get married, so they allowed it. Guy complains about everything during the planning process, especially over them not serving alcohol. Is generally a to us, but is just straight up cruel to her. Like at one point when we were meeting, I asked after her wedding dress because South Asian wedding dresses are gorgeous. She's showing me this amazing dress, and he says straight up, I don't know what she picked that one, she looks fat and old in it. Every other woman is going to be more beautiful than her wedding day. He then shows me this dress he picked out, which isn't traditional South Asian style at all, and is very Western and very fugly, and basically makes the model in the picture look naked, it's so sheer. When she says something about how no mosque would let her in dressed like that and her traditions are important, he just sneered and said she should get over it, and her traditions weren't that important. Divorce red flag. Found out later they didn't last a day. From the way the servers tell it, midway through the reception, guy raises his hand to his new bride when she asked him a question about being drunk, and she flinched and turned away, protecting her face. He grabs her by the arm and rips her around, pissed. Her mother and aunt were standing 3 feet from her and lost their fucking minds, realizing what must have been happening there. His response when mom started to lose her on him was to hit the mother. So in the middle of this very big 600+ person Bangladeshi wedding, this 20-something outsider dickhead no one wanted her to marry anyway, smacked a well-respected woman in their community. There was a brawl. The cops were called. Marriage was annulled. Edit. Because so many of you are asking, baking a cake in the weeks leading up to the even is standard. You bake the sponge triple wrap and flash freeze. Frozen cakes are actually much less likely to taste dry or gross, because if you fresh bake, they'll be sitting out for days on end until they can be decorated and absorb whatever smells are in the refrigerator and dry out. Typically, we also will cover them in simple syrup after thawing but before assembly, which is why bakery cakes are so much more moist than a lot of homemade ones. I've been working as a baker since I was 15, and this is very much the practice of every place I've ever worked when it comes to celebration cakes. Story 5. I worked fine dining catering for over 20 years, so I've worked lots of weddings and receptions. I once heard a bride at the reception during the toasts say that she actually thought she was asking out the groom's twin brother on their first date, and that might actually be cute, except she just kept going on. How the twin was more compatible, etc. Then she ended the toast with, "Well, as nice as you are, you'll make a great first husband." I was walking past the cameraman at that time, and you can hear me on tape saying, "Did you get that? Tell me you got that." Story 6 wedding DJ here. Had a wedding a few years ago where the groom was a total dickhead. When it was his turn to make a speech, he refused to make one. When the bride's sister begged him to please make a speech, or at least just tell the bride she looks beautiful, he got up, took the mic, mumbled to her that she looks beautiful, and sat back down. When I left after the wedding was done, I was walking to my van with some gear, and I saw the bride sitting one side crying. Found out a few days later that the groom hit her 3 days before the wedding, and he tried to hit her at the wedding again when she asked him to not drink so much and pace himself. Story 7. Not actually in the industry, but I have helped out a friend with a few weddings. 2 of the weddings I could just tell they weren't going to make it. The first wedding, the bride and groom hardly talked the entire wedding. It was like they had nothing in common. And then later the groom pretty much fucks off halfway through and went home because I quote, "he was tired." So he just left his bride having to take pictures with the wedding guests on her own. He never came back that evening, so she had to greet everyone off, etc. Funny enough, about a year later I heard they're filing for divorce. Another time was actually last summer. Just before the wedding speeches, the groom went go hang out with his friends for like half an hour, leaving the bride sitting there alone and delaying the speeches. Then right after the bride and groom cut the cake, he once again went to go hang out with his friends and abandoned his wife. So she was left alone having to mingle with all the guests, and he made no interaction with her side of the guests. He stuck with his friends the rest of the evening. His wife basically had to go and beg him to come and take more wedding pictures. At one point in the evening, he actually went for a drive with his friends for about an hour, and his wife had no idea where he was. I mean, I get wanting to mingle with your friends at your wedding, but to not even mingle with your wife's family or friends on your wedding day seems quite rude. Story 8. I don't work in the wedding industry, but I have a depressing wedding story. I have a friend who I grew up with. She was always gorgeous and incredibly popular with guys, and I always thought she was a great person. As I got older, I came to realize she was actually extremely toxic in relationships and did better when she was single. She had been seeing a new guy for 2 months when one day I receive a wedding invitation in the mail. Knowing her history, it was a massive red flag for me. I turn up to the wedding, and it's at a gorgeous little backyard-type wedding. It's spring, and everything looks perfect. I greet her family, and it's like I've turned up to a funeral, not a wedding. They're all extremely solemn, and when I ask about the groom, her mother rolls her eyes and says, "This is a mistake." Wedding commences, and as the bride comes down the aisle, her face is gray and like she would rather be anywhere else. They exchange vows while the bride does everything in her power to not touch her husband-to-be, even standing a solid meter away from him as they stand at the front. She actually cringes and looks away when he gets choked up saying how much he loves her. When the priest announces the kiss, the bride takes a slow step forward and presents her cheek for him to kiss instead of her lips. No one cheers. It's just an awkward shuffling of feet and a few scattered claps. It was the worst wedding I've ever been to. They lasted about 3 months before separating. Story 9. I work in the industry, side hobby, and I saw it before entering. Recent husband came to me, a total stranger to him, and asked what I would do if I found my fiancée fucking her dance partner 3 weeks before the wedding. I just shook my head and walked away. 2 months. Story 10. It's sad reading. So many of these replies and realizing most of these couples probably weren't even friends to each other. Edit. Didn't expect so many responses. Thanks for sharing. I always love a good thread. Honestly though, some of these made me realize how lucky I am to have found my favorite person. I hope y'all find yours soon if you haven't already. Story 11. Was working at a hotel during a wedding weekend, and the father of the bride and the groom were caught masturbating one another by one of the staff 2 days before the wedding. We all had a bit of a giggle and assumed this was some sort of misunderstanding. There were weird ideas thrown around like, maybe there is a family tradition where they hold each other's ducks while they kiss or something like that. Anyway, they bear all still in good spirits and the wedding goes ahead. At 7:57 p.m. on the night of the wedding, I brought the bottle of champagne up to the room along with some other things we did for a wedding night. Normally before they check in, but they were already staying in that room before they got married. I was told there is nobody in the room, and the groom is downstairs and the bride is supposed to be out getting photos or something. I knock. We had to even when we knew somebody was in there. Then quickly open the door and walk straight in. The bride is bent over the chair with her wedding dress over her head, and the best man is pounding her from behind. I just left the champagne on the ground and left. One seriously fucked up family, but they all tipped well. Story 12. Was at a friend's wedding once. It was at the Justice of the Peace, when the judge or officiant came around to, if anyone doesn't believe in the union, to speak up or forever hold your peace. A loud, "uh-oh," came shrieking from the back. It was my friend's 2-year-old son. Everybody was joking, saying it was a sign. Less than a year later, the couple got divorced. Story 13. I perform ceremonies as an officiant, and no other officiants. The worst, IMHO, are the weddings that are just a bad idea. The couple is young, inexperienced, and selfish. I mean, even courthouse weddings can last decades. But if you have a wedding that is clearly not planned out, they are often not thrown out as well. Weddings that are rebellious as a "you daddy, I am 19 and marry who I want." I give about 2 years, especially if the bride and groom are out of sync with one another, or one just looks like this was the other's idea primarily. Oddly enough, weddings with cheesy themes, Star Wars, Elvis, etc., last longer than the traditional styles. I have theories on that, but don't have enough data that's not anecdotal to back it up. But I think casual weddings where everyone is relaxed, happy, and having a good time because the wedding is about celebrating rather than ceremony will last the longest. A sense of humor helps. If both the bride and groom are relaxed and silly with one another, those last the longest. Story 14. I had a buddy who put himself through grad school playing violin at weddings. He said there were several that everybody knew it was the wrong choice. He said you could just see it in their eyes and how they walked. Story 15. I worked at a hotel in the kitchen. We did a trashy wedding where the cake was brought in from Walmart. Groom was caught making out with a bridesmaid in a conference room, and we saw the bride throw her ring into a storm drain across the street. Story 16. Heard from a friend who did calligraphy that a bride came to get wedding invites, and the usual wording of bride mom and dad and groom mom and dad invite you to the wedding of bride and groom. Bride didn't want groom's parents' names on the invite. My mate did an invite mock-up, called the couple for a check, and the groom lost it, because groom's parents were the ones paying for most of the wedding. They didn't need any invites. Story 17. Used to serve at a lot of weddings. At one very expensive engagement party, the groom got drunk and tried to pick a fight with one of the servers. He then punched another guest and had to be walked out. Bride seemed upset but not shocked. Story 18. I am not in the industry. I have a story anyway. When me and my wife were about to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary, my family let me know that they had a pool. When we got married, for how long we would last. None of them had us lasting longer than a year. This year, we're going to be celebrating 19 years married together. We feel that after 2020, we are having the best time together and still best friends. The pot was never claimed. Story 19. Night before the wedding, the bride-to-be tried to sleep with me on her stag night, crying on my shoulder she wasn't ready for marriage. Even my 18-year-old hormonal brain did a big nope there. They lasted a year. Story 20. I used to drive a limo and did a few weddings. This one Saturday afternoon, I am picking up both bride and groom, best man and maid of honor. Poor groom has his arm in a full cast and immobilized with a steel rod. Turns out he had shattered IOI a week earlier while riding an ATV. They all get in the car and the bride-to-be starts ragging him hardcore, telling him he is such an idiot, he has ruined the wedding, he is such a loser. She is not letting up and not letting go. Obviously she knew about the injury, so it wasn't a surprise. She was just using it to drop F-bombs and other unwholesome words in his general direction. I pull up to the church and she and the maid of honor leap out and go into the church. The best man asks if he still wants to go through with the wedding, and the poor dumb says yes with the enthusiasm of a sleepy sloth. I just wanted to say, no, dude. Don't spend the next few years with that witch bitch. But he was getting out of the car by then. I don't know how it turned out, I am sure it wasn't good. Story 21. Worked wedding receptions. Here are some favorites. Bride started stripping on the table while the groom was outside. Bride and best man had in a closet. Bride lost her ring less than 3 hours after being married. Mother of the groom lit the table on fire because she didn't like the bride or her family. Groom was passed out drunk less than 30 minutes into the reception. He pre-gamed in the limo. Our bartender refused to serve him when he arrived. Groomsmen loaded him back into the limo to sleep it off, and he didn't come back that night. Story 22. I ran a fairly upmarket hotel and restaurant that sometimes hosted weddings, made a rookie error and booked in a wedding for Christmas Eve. This should have been a warning sign, as it shows a pretty significant lack of consideration for friends and family, making them travel across the country on one of the most irritating days of the year, when we'd all rather be at home with family preparing for the next day. They turned up 3 hours early, and the battle axe of a bride proceeded to shout at us for not being prepared, surrounded by her incredibly embarrassed but not unsurprised family. There were various other red flags throughout the night, but the main one was when the husband got blind drunk on whiskey and asked me to go to his hotel room with him and break him in as a married man. I politely refused. Story 23. Not necessarily a divorce between the happy couple, but while working weddings one summer, I saw the best man and maid of honor walk out of the same bathroom like 10 seconds apart. So I've always wondered how that went over. Story 24. I have a friend who is a wedding photographer, a rather busy and expensive one at that, so people usually book a year in advance. So she had a bride book the wedding date and pay the deposit. Nothing unusual there. The bride confirmed the venue, also booked and pricey, and had the general discussions with her about the style that she wanted, etc. They had regular meetings over the following months, but the groom was never there. A bit unusual, but not unheard of. So it's now 4 weeks before the wedding, and they have the meeting to lock down all the details, but still no groom. My friend asks about him, and the bride mentions for the first time that she isn't engaged. Okay, maybe she has a long-term boyfriend and is planning a surprise wedding. No, it turns out that she doesn't have a boyfriend or any guy in mind, but she prayed about it, and God told her to trust that he will provide a groom for her. So, in the end, no groom magically materialized, and there was no wedding. So in that case, the marriage lasted 0 minutes, and we were all sure that it wasn't going to work out. In fact, at the time, we had some running jokes about her meeting a guy on a date and asking him if he wants to go to a wedding with her next weekend. Story 25. I used to work at a popular wedding venue. Bride and groom came in the day before for rehearsal, checked the decorations, and played a sweet video of the couple. Standard wedding bullshit. Next day, bride and groom arrived fighting the entire time until reception, where the groom proceeded to drink himself blind before speeches and had to be carried out. Didn't even get to play that video. It was the best shift ever. Got to go home early and take home a bunch of food already paid for. Story 26. I work for a catering company. I knew they were going to get a divorce as soon as the bride started grinding on the best man when the groom was puking his guts out in the corner. Edit. Grammar. Story 27. My background is in marriage and family therapy, and I work at a wedding venue now. There have been many times that I thought a couple is destined for future therapy, if not divorce. Especially when I see the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse as described by Gottman: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling. I also assume that things won't end well when either of the bride or groom is a big bully towards me or the other vendors. It just makes me feel bad for the future spouse. But we don't tend to hear much from the couples once they are married, so I usually won't know how things end up down the road. Story 28. I work catering gigs in Florida. The bride was being super mean towards the groom during dinner and the reception, like a sarcastic, "you should have known to do that already" tone. Our crew figured, yep, this is a short marriage. After the obligatory dances and dinner had started, the groom came up, tipped the DJ, the photographers, then came over, tipped our crew way too much, thanked us very sweetly, and said he was going to skip away and drive down to the beach a few minutes away while the party continued. He never came back. Next day, we were told by the bride's family the sheriff found his car, the groom's body, and a gun down by the beach. Story 29. What's the deal with many answers talking about the bride fucking the best man? Why would the bride suddenly find the groom's brother best friend irresistible on the wedding day? And what kind of sick people their friend's fiancé on the wedding day? Story 30. I bake wedding cakes and cookies, but this happened before I was in the business. A week before the wedding, bride was talking all about how excited she was to get married because that meant she could finally do cocaine. Asterisk what? Asterisk groom was confused and asked for more info. Bride was like, well, they say when you do drugs, you should do them with someone you trust. She planned on them doing it on their honeymoon. When he straight up said no, she threatened to call off the wedding. He said fine, call it off. Wedding still happened. She gave in. B asterisk UU asterisk T 3 months later, she took their 7-month-old daughter to a drug party at her sister's while groom was working. He found out about it, showed up at the house, everyone was passed out, and his daughter was screaming, crying on the bedroom floor. He took her and left without a word to anyone, packed his bags, and never contacted bride again. Story 31. Many years ago, I had a side hustle doing cakes and would often get orders for wedding cakes. Long story short, the bride-to-be threw a full-fledged, stompy-footed tantrum, locking herself in my bathroom and refused to come out because the groom was unreasonably insisting on having a say in what the cake flavor was going to be. Like, I'd say through the door, "Get out of my bathroom," and all I'd get was a whiny, defiant little no. IRC, she was about 22. Story 32. My wife has been a wedding photographer, and I've helped her out from time to time. One of the first weddings we did, I got this really trashy vibe off the bride. I couldn't quite place my finger on what specifically set it off, but if I had to guess, I would probably pin it on my extended family, many of whom could be extras in Deliverance. I just ended up with a sixth sense of these things. I told my then-girlfriend, now wife, that I don't think they're going to last very long. Sure enough, a few months later, My wife is contacted by the mother of the bride for the wedding photos. She asks why the bride didn't contact her about it, as she's tried to reach her a few times, and the mother just said she's been indisposed for a bit, and if she could just send the photos to her. I get into Google Foo mode and look up the bride, and after a bit of digging, find an arrest report for 3 days after the wedding from Florida, where the honeymooned. She was arrested for publicly assaulting her new husband while drunk and putting him in the hospital. Story 33. Oh yeah, definitely. Ceremony is coming up, but the groom is nowhere to be found. Everyone is looking for him. We look in the groom's lounge, hangout room where the groom and groomsmen hang out. There he is banging the maid of honor. Shame, shame, shame. Story 34. I've been the DJ at a few hundred weddings. There was drama at most of them in some way. One in particular broke out into an old-school saloon-style fight, like in the old Western movies. I'm pretty sure that one didn't last. Story 35. Yes. One of my brides was nervous and got so drunk before the ceremony that she had to be helped down the aisle. Then when the ceremony was over, instead of kissing the groom, we now pronounce you man and wife, she licked him from chin to eyeball. She fell during the recessional and knocked over a waiter carrying champagne. She couldn't be in their post-ceremony photo shoot because she kept falling. When it was time to cut the cake, we couldn't find her. Our staff went to her hotel room and found her covered in her own vomit, still in her wedding dress. She had the audacity to ask for a refund after all of this. They're divorced now. Edited to note, this was a symbolic ceremony, and they were legally married beforehand. Overall, the situation was quite sad. Story 36. I'm a photographer, and I've shot 3 weddings BC. I hate them, and they are not for me. Bless you guys who do it, but it's too much work and drama for me and not worth the money. Anyway, one of the weddings, the groom called the bride unattractive. She was stunning and used to model. Was maybe a size 2, and he was cute, but generic cute. He kept taking shots of vodka with his boys, and asked for a full-on photo shoot with his mom. He was definitely a mama's boy. BC mom was hovering, but you know it's bad when mom suggests that he maybe take some photos with his wife. He told me to STFU every time I redirected, so after the 3rd time that happened, and he flashed me his junk, I started packing up. When he started yelling at me, I just told him no one talks to me like that, and I'd send them a refund. I knew right then that it wouldn't last. He started crying and said he'd behave. He did, but it didn't matter. BC 2 weeks later, the marriage was annulled. No one wanted the photos. I was paid in full for photos no one wanted. Bride's dad had paid me, and tipped me well too. When I offered to refund him half anyway, he said the bride knew when the groom yelled at me and cried that it wasn't going to work, so I earned it. I guess the whole fam was trying to get them to call it off. Story 37, I'm a therapist, and marriage counseling a lot of times is, unfortunately, divorce counseling. If your spouse talks about it, go. People wait way too long. Story 38. They are the best customers. There is a correlation between more money spent on a wedding and chance of divorce, plus the potential for repeat business. Story 39. Long time ago, worked as a wedding planner, caterer, depended on the client. Woman calls on Monday morning, her fiancé had proposed the day before, Sunday, and she wanted to get married that Saturday. Story 40. I'm a wedding photographer, and the first red flag was how much flipping money they were spending. They had multiple venues, one was a golf resort, really fancy schmancy. Could have bought a really, really nice car with that kind of money. Down payment on an expensive home kind of money. Second, when I showed up to do the getting ready shots in their house, the husband's family was really nice to me, almost treated me like a family friend. Whenever she was brought up, his family would look at me and make a face or roll their eyes, obviously not happy with his choice of lady. It seemed implied that since they already had a kid that I guess he has to, which was kind of sad. I had half a mind to tell him that he didn't have to get married if he wasn't happy, which I may have implied very gently. Not professional, I know, but she was kind of a monster. Not just the day of, but even after. In my opinion, she treated her new husband really poorly. Right after the ceremony, they were outside and she was already yelling at him about something. Just checked, and they're still married, but according to her posts, she's anti-vax. Story 41. Used to moonlight as a musician for hire in college, and did more than a few weddings. Saw many that raised an eyebrow, but the 2 that really stood out as rough. Groom was super emotional and smiling when the bride first appeared at the church doors to walk down the aisle, and the bride was more interested in hollering at her family and friends as she made her way down the aisle. I don't think she looked at the groom once on her way down. You just saw his face drop as she got closer, and had no interest in even looking at the man she was about to marry. The other, I had heard from the wedding planner that the bride and her bridesmaids had gone through at least 10 bottles of champagne throughout the morning, and all were ridiculously drunk, and to keep playing no matter what happens. Well, 2 of the 3 bridesmaids fell and had trouble getting up on the way down the aisle. The bride and the maid of honor made it down the aisle, but had great difficulty. The groom basically was holding the bride up for the entirety of the ceremony, and she very loudly refused a chair. Also, the flower girl looked a little green around the gills and threw up into her basket during the vows. I guess she was either given or sneaked some champagne as well. Wedding planner said they had argued the night before over whether they were going to drink before the wedding. Groom wanted to stay sober until the reception. Bride disagreed. Ran into the planner at another wedding, and she said they had a massive fight in the limo on the way to take pictures, which the bride side of the wedding party was in no shape to participate in, so they skipped them. Photographer ended up doing a goofy shoot with the groomsmen since they had already paid for photos. Bride and bridesmaids sat in the limo, drinking more, showed up to the reception, and the bride was passed out. Groom made an apology speech to the guests and got an Uber home, alone. On a nicer note, I was playing in a church that was not air-conditioned in the middle of August, and the bride passed out from the heat. Groom caught her, laid her down super gently, ran and got a chair while someone got her some orange juice, and did the entire ceremony with her in the chair and him on one knee next to her. Was super sweet, and she cried the entire time. Another time, someone actually did try to do the speak now or forever hold your peace, and the bride whips around, cuts the guy off and says, "For the final time, no. I never have or never will want to be with you. Shut the fuck up and let me get married." Kisses her groom on the cheek and says cheerfully, "Now let's get married." Wasn't able to get any background details on that one though. Story 42. I don't work in the industry, just have my own personal story. My boyfriend and I got invited to his female coworker's wedding. We used to go dancing with her while she was engaged. Her boyfriend was stationed on the East Coast. Her fiancé didn't take kindly to a male coworker showing up to the wedding that we were invited to, and I even went to her bridal shower. So the groom sent his dad to threaten my boyfriend into leaving because they work in the same industry, i.e., I have connections. You'll never work in underscore again, even though he was retired. Groom also refused to dance with the bride except for photos, and she loved to line dance, so she was crushed. All of us who cared about the bride knew her groom was just a shitty guy. They lasted a year. Story 43. Not due to the couples per se, but due to the weddings. 2 weddings stand out to me. 1. Small wedding, about 50 guests. The groom and his family were white. The bride and hers were black. Both the bride and groom were over 35. The DJ played music, but absolutely nobody danced. Barely anyone spoke. Seemed like nobody really wanted to be there. 2. The best man, brother of the bride, got drunk, became belligerent, and sucker punched the wedding planner. Cops show up, and he tried to hit them too. He got arrested and had to be hogtied. The bride was in tears. The groom was pissed off and made no attempts to try and comfort her. Story 44. I've been right a few times for sure. Photographer here. One groom was so full of himself, but did that whatever you want, my queen thing where he wants to be seen as this great guy, but really he's a self-absorbed. He was a chef and fucking loved telling people that. It was a quick engagement and marriage, and I got the feeling maybe too quick. The wedding and reception were to be at his parents' place, and his mom had a lot of input, as did his sister. The bride got shut down whenever she talked. On the day of the wedding, I arrived to shoot the bride getting ready. She is alone with the hair and makeup person. I initially thought that person was a friend, but she wasn't. Her bridesmaids were not there. 2 hours go by. She can't get a hold of them. The makeup person leaves. Asterisk. I help her put her veil on and do up her shoes. Asterisk, I am feeling asterisk, so asterisk bad for her, and also awkward as this is supposed to be her big day, and here is basically a stranger putting her veil on and telling her she looks great. Finally, the bridesmaids come in. The maid of honor is the groom's sister. When the bride questions them, the sister says they went out for breakfast. The bride asks why they wouldn't tell her or bring her food, and they get, like she's being bridezilla. Then it comes out that the groom was invited for breakfast, along with the groomsmen. Asterisk. And they all had started drinking. Asterisk. It's only 11:30 a.m. and the bridal party is half lit. The kicker, none of the bridesmaids are dressed or have their hair or makeup done. The wedding is in 30 mans. I get 0 photos of the bridesmaids. I run to shoot the groomsmen. They are doing shots. I get some great photos of them because they're drunk and all dressed up and feeling great. Wedding happens and that part is fine. We're supposed to go to a nearby beach and trail for photos. This never happens because the groom is literally talking to every person in attendance in the longest receiving line situation I have ever seen. He keeps drinking. The meal happens and takes forever. The sun is about to set. I tell the couple I literally have 0 photos of them alone together and we need to go. He says, yeah, after the speeches. He gets up to speak after several of his friends and his sister do 10-minute speeches, and he goes on and on and on. Most of it has nothing to do with his new bride. 30 mins into his speech and the sun is set. He finally finishes and I approach the bride. She just looks at me, defeated, and says, "You can just go home now." Groom was in the middle of a group of people, chugging a beer and laughing loudly while his beautiful new bride sat alone, seemingly wondering what she got herself into. I delivered the images, and they didn't pay the remainder amount. I got a million excuses. After a month, I finally texted him and said I was going through small claims. The next day, he sent an EFT with an angry message about hounding him and giving me a bad review. I saw her 6 months later at a restaurant, and before I could ask, she told me she left him. Saw him a few months ago working at a liquor store downtown. I guess being a chef didn't work out. A friend told me they know of him and he got fired from 3 restaurants. He ignored me while he flirted hard with this woman. I you not. Just before we left, he said to her, "I'm off in 5 minutes. I'll walk with you to that store. I'll tell Charlie to put that delicious cab sauve aside for you." So smooth. Good luck, lady.